Good evening, everyone. It's a profound question we're exploring tonight. Does the soul survive during cremation? And to even begin answering it, we must first ask, what is the soul? From the earliest moments of human history, people have sensed that there's something more to us than flesh and bone. We don't just have bodies, we feel as though we inhabit them. When you look in the mirror, you don't just see skin and eyes staring back. You recognize yourself. That sense of I, that inner voice, that awareness, where does it come from? And where does it go when the body is gone? Different cultures and traditions have grappled with this in their own ways. The ancient Egyptians believed in the Ka and the Ba, aspects of the soul that lived on after death, requiring preservation of the body for the afterlife. The Greeks spoke of the psyche, an immortal essence that transcended the physical. Hinduism and Buddhism teach Atman or consciousness, an eternal spark that reincarnates until it achieves liberation. Christianity, Islam, and Judaism speak of the soul as God's breath within us, destined for judgment or paradise. Even in secular philosophy, thinkers from Plato to Descartes argued that the mind, or the soul, exists beyond mere matter. But here's where it gets even more fascinating. Modern science, for all its advances, still can't pin down consciousness. We can map brain activity, study neurons firing, even predict decisions before the mind is aware of them. But none of that fully explains why we experience existence at all. Why is there a self inside this biological machine? Some scientists suggest consciousness is just an emergent property of the brain, like light from a bulb. Switch it off, and it's gone. Others, drawing from quantum theories or near-death experiences, wonder if awareness might persist in some form beyond physical death. And that brings us back to cremation. If fire reduces the body to ashes, what happens to that essence we call the soul? Does it linger in the smoke, rise with the heat, or vanish like vapor? Or was it never tied to the body in the first place? These aren't just abstract questions. They shape how we grieve, how we honor the dead, how we face our own mortality. Because if the soul does survive, if some part of the person we loved carries on, then cremation isn't an end, it's a transformation. So as we move forward tonight, keep that question alive in your mind. Because whether you find your answer in faith, science, or something beyond both, the search itself is what makes us human. Pause, then transition smoothly into the next point. Now, let's take a closer look at what actually happens during cremation. Let's pull back the curtain for a moment. What actually happens when a body is cremated? It's a question that carries both scientific weight and deep emotional significance. Because if we're asking whether the soul survives the flames, we should first understand what those flames do. The process begins with preparation. The body, often in a simple container or casket made of combustible materials, is placed inside a cremation chamber, sometimes called a retort. This isn't an open fire like you might imagine from ancient funeral pyres. Modern cremation is precise, regulated, and intensely hot, reaching temperatures between 400 and 800 degrees Fahrenheit. At that heat, organic matter doesn't just burn, it undergoes a complete transformation. What's left after several hours isn't ash in the way we think of it, not like the soft gray remnants of a campfire. Instead, the bones, now calcified and brittle, are processed into what we call cremains. Any metals, fillings, surgical implants are separated out, and what remains is a fine, pale powder, often weighing just a few pounds. It's a startling contrast to the living, breathing person that once was. Now, here's where the mystery deepens. Scientifically, we know exactly what happens to the body. Water evaporates, tissues and organs break down into gases and particulates, bones become mineral fragments. The laws of thermodynamics hold firm. Energy isn't destroyed, only changed. But does that energy still carry some imprint of the person? Some cultures say yes. In Hindu tradition, the fire releases the soul from its earthly bonds, freeing it for rebirth. Others see the rising smoke as symbolic of the spirit ascending, but science, of course, deals in measurable truths, and from that perspective, cremation is simply a rapid form of decomposition, nature's process sped up by technology. There's no evidence, no instrument that can detect a soul leaving the body in those flames, and yet, isn't it interesting how many people, across time and distance, have felt something more happening in that moment? How even in our secular age we still speak of the departed in ways that suggest presence, not just memory. Maybe that's the real question beneath all this, not just what happens to the body, but what happens to our connection to the one we've lost. Because even after the last ember cools, the love, the grief, the stories, they don't turn to ash, they linger, and that leads us to the heart of the matter. If the soul is something beyond the physical, then perhaps it was never in the flames to begin with. Pause, then transition smoothly into the next point, which brings us to the beliefs that have shaped our understanding for centuries. If we want to understand what happens to the soul during cremation, we can't just look at the science of flames and ashes. We have to listen to the voices of faith, the wisdom traditions that have grappled with death's mystery for thousands of years. Because while science tells us how the body transforms, religion and spirituality attempt to answer the deeper question, where does the person go? Take Hinduism, for example. Here, cremation isn't just accepted, it's sacred. The ancient Vedas describe fire as a purifier, a divine messenger that carries the soul toward liberation. When a Hindu body burns on the ghats of Varanasi, the belief isn't that the soul is destroyed, but that it's released from its earthly cycle. The flames break the bonds of karma, allowing the Atman, the true self, to continue its journey. It's a profound idea that fire doesn't end something, but frees it. Buddhism shares a similar perspective, though with a different destination. The body, an empty vessel, the soul, more like a stream of consciousness, flowing from one life to the next. Cremation, in many Buddhist traditions, is a reminder of impermanence, the teaching that all forms dissolve, but the essence continues. In Tibet, they take this even further with sky burials, allowing vultures to carry the physical remains into the air. It's another way of saying, the body is just a shell. What matters has already flown. Now, contrast that with Christianity's historical relationship with cremation. For centuries, the Church opposed it, not because they believed it harmed the soul, but because it contradicted the hope of bodily resurrection. How could the body rise on the last day if it had been reduced to ashes? But here's what's fascinating. That tension has eased in modern times. Many Christians now see cremation as a practical choice, trusting that if God can resurrect a decomposed body, he can certainly gather ashes. The soul's fate in this view was never tied to the method of burial. It was always in God's hands. Islam takes a firmer stance. Traditional teachings insist on burial, and quickly. The body should return to the earth naturally. Cremation, forbidden. Why? Because it's seen as a violation of the body's sanctity, a disrespect to the vessel that once housed the soul. But even here there's nuance. Some scholars argue that in extraordinary cases, pandemics, disasters, the prohibition might bend. Because ultimately, Allah judges the soul, not the state of the body. And then there are the indigenous traditions, where fire often plays a sacred role. The Navajo, for instance, traditionally avoided cremation, fearing the smoke would carry the spirit away too abruptly. But other native cultures used fire ceremonially to send prayers upward, to transform the physical into the spiritual. The common thread, a belief that death isn't an end, but a crossing. So what do we take from all this? That every faith in its own way is trying to solve the same riddle. When the body is gone, what remains? Some see cremation as liberation, others as disruption, but nearly all agree on one thing: the soul's journey doesn't end at the pyre. And that leads us to the next great question: what if both science and spirituality are pointing to the same truth, just in different languages? Pause, then transition smoothly into the next point, which brings us to the great debate between the measurable and the mystical. Now we arrive at the great crossroads of our discussion, where measurable facts meet unanswerable mysteries. Science gives us a framework for understanding what happens to the physical body during cremation, but when we ask about the soul, we step into territory that laboratories cannot fully map. This tension between empirical evidence and spiritual intuition is where things get truly fascinating. Let's begin with what science can tell us. Neurologists have shown that consciousness arises from the brain's complex neural networks. When brain activity ceases, so too does our measurable experience of self. In this view, cremation is simply the final step in a biological process, the transformation of organic matter into its basic chemical components. There's no scientific instrument that can detect a soul departing the body, no measurable energy signature that corresponds to what religions might call spirit. The physics is clear. The body's mass becomes heat, gas, and mineral remain. Yet here's the curious thing: science itself still struggles to explain the hard problem of consciousness. Why do we experience existence at all? Why does a particular arrangement of neurons create the feeling of love, or grief, or wonder? Some quantum physicists have proposed theories about consciousness existing beyond the brain, while researchers studying near-death experiences have documented cases where patients accurately describe events that occurred while they were clinically dead. These anomalies suggest there may be aspects of existence that our current scientific models can't yet explain. The metaphysical perspective approaches this mystery from the opposite direction. Ancient traditions speak of the soul as energy, not the kind we measure in joules or calories, but as a fundamental essence. In this view, cremation might release the soul from its physical container, allowing it to transition to another state of being. The fire becomes not an end, but a transformation point. Some esoteric traditions even describe multiple layers of the soul, parts that reincarnate, parts that return to a universal source, parts that remain as ancestral presence. Modern parapsychology has attempted to bridge these worlds. Studies on mediums, deathbed visions, and past life memories in children present data that challenges materialist explanations. While skeptics rightly demand rigorous evidence, the persistence of these phenomena across cultures suggests they tap into something fundamental about human experience. This brings us to the heart of our dilemma. Science requires repeatable evidence. Spirituality operates in the realm of personal experience and faith. They speak different languages, yet both attempt to answer the same profound questions. Perhaps the truth lies in recognizing that our current scientific understanding may be incomplete when it comes to consciousness, just as spiritual traditions acknowledge that the soul's nature is ultimately mysterious. What's remarkable is how these seemingly opposed perspectives might actually complement each other. The scientific view grounds us in physical reality, while metaphysical insights remind us that reality may be far more complex than we currently understand. In the face of death, and especially the dramatic transformation of cremation, we're confronted with the limits of both knowledge and language. So where does this leave us? Maybe the most honest answer is that we don't know for certain what happens to the soul during cremation, but the very fact that humans across time and cultures have asked this question suggests it touches on something essential about what it means to be alive, and what might await us beyond the flames. Pause, then transition smoothly into the next point. This brings us to how these abstract concepts play out in the deeply personal realm of grief and remembrance. There's something profoundly intimate about how we, as individuals and communities make sense of death, especially when faced with the visceral transformation of cremation. Beyond the theology and the science, beyond the debates about what happens to the soul, there's the raw human experience of standing before the flames and wondering, where are you now? I've spoken with mourners who've watched smoke rise from a crematorium chimney and felt inexplicably that they were witnessing a final farewell, not just to a body, but to something intangible. A widow in Japan once told me how she watched the smoke curl into the sky after her husband's cremation and, for a fleeting moment, felt his presence in the wind. In Bali, families laugh through tears as they prepare elaborate offerings for Ngaben, the Hindu cremation ceremony, believing the fire carries their loved one's spirit to ancestors. These aren't just rituals, they're languages of grief and hope, ways of navigating the unanswerable. But culture shapes these experiences in startlingly different ways. In Mexico, Dia de los Muertos celebrates the dead as still present, their souls returning annually to share a meal with the living. Cremation ashes might be kept on an altar, surrounded by marigolds and photographs, as if the person could still savor the scent. Contrast that with traditional Zoroastrian practice, where bodies are exposed to the elements in towers of silence, not burned but left for vultures because fire is too sacred for death. Both traditions, though opposite in method, share a conviction: the body is temporary, but the connection endures. Then there are the private moments no ceremony can capture, the way someone might clutch an urn and whisper secrets to it years later. The dreams where the departed appear vivid and whole, leaving us to wonder, was that just my mind's consolation or something more? Science calls these bereavement hallucinations and notes how common they are. But to the grieving, they often feel like visitations, proof that love outlasts flesh. Modern secular culture has its own ways of grappling with this. We scatter ashes in meaningful places, a favorite hiking trail, a concert hall, the sea, as if returning the physical to where the spirit thrived. Artists incorporate cremains into glass sculptures or diamonds. Astronauts' ashes have been launched into space. These acts defy ancient taboos about disturbing the dead, yet they spring from the same impulse, to honor a life by making its remnants part of the ongoing story of the world. What's remarkable is how these personal and cultural responses often bypass abstract debates about the soul's nature. They operate on a different plane, one where metaphor and meaning matter more than metaphysics. A daughter doesn't need to define the soul to feel her mother's laughter in ocean waves where her ashes were scattered. A veteran's comrades don't require theological certainty to sense his courage lingering in the flag folded over his urn. Perhaps this is the deepest wisdom we encounter when death strips away our pretenses, that what we call the soul might simply be the sum of how we're remembered, how we're loved, how we linger in the lives we touch. Cremation, with its stark reduction of the physical, forces us to confront what truly remains. And across cultures, the answer is strikingly similar: not ashes, but stories; not smoke, but legacy. Pause, then transition smoothly into the final point, which brings us, at last, to the question that holds all others. In the end, does it matter what we believe? As we stand here at the edge of this profound question, watching the embers of our discussion glow in the dark of the unknown, we're left with a realization: the mystery of the soul's journey through cremation isn't a puzzle to be solved, but a mirror held up to our deepest human longings. Whether we approach it through scripture or science, through ritual or raw grief, what we're really asking is, does love outlast fire? Does meaning survive annihilation? The beautiful, frustrating truth is that no one can give you a definitive answer. The physicist can describe the exact moment when molecular bonds break in the heat, but cannot measure what, if anything, escapes. The priest can quote sacred texts assuring the soul's immortality, but cannot prove it to a skeptic. The mourner at the crematorium may feel a presence in the rising smoke, but cannot bottle that feeling as evidence, and yet here we all are, century after century, culture after culture, unable to stop asking, because the question itself is woven into what makes us human. Perhaps the most honest thing we can say is this: it matters less what you believe about the soul's fate during cremation than how that belief shapes your living. For some, the certainty of an afterlife brings comfort. For others, the finality of death lends urgency to each fleeting day. Both perspectives, in their own way, honor the dead by affirming the preciousness of life. I've stood with families who chose cremation for practical reasons, only to find themselves years later speaking to the urn as if it held a listener. I've met scientists who dismiss the soul as superstition, yet visit grave sites to update departed parents on their lives. These contradictions aren't failures of logic. They're testaments to how love defies categories. When we lose someone, we don't experience them as a theological concept or a biological process. We experience them as a presence that lingers in ways we can't explain but can't deny. So does the soul survive cremation? The answer may depend on what you mean by soul. If it's an immortal essence destined for paradise or rebirth, then faith says yes. Fire is just a doorway. If it's the indelible mark a life leaves on others, then memory says yes. Flames can't burn away influence. And if it's the mysterious spark of consciousness that science still can't locate, well, perhaps humility is wisest. The universe has surprised us before. In the end, this question matters not because we'll find one perfect answer, but because the search connects us across time. To the Neanderthals who buried their dead with flowers, to the philosophers who debated the mind's nature, to you and me standing here tonight wondering. That continuity itself is a kind of immortality. So let me leave you with this. Whatever you believe about the soul and the flames, carry it gently, but carry it forward. Let it comfort you when grief is heavy. Let it humble you when certainty beckons, and above all, let it remind you that the love we fear losing to fire was never confined to flesh in the first place.